This single image, it's sharp, but it's not perfect. Now this image, it's very, very sharp from back to front. And what's the difference? I used focus stacking in Helicon Focus to get that result. Now here's the interesting part. I shot it at 30 millimeters in f/16, which is usually enough to get you some pretty good depth of field from back to front. So the difference is not dramatic, but it's very subtle. And why do I do it? It really comes down to consistency of process. And in this video, I'm going to show you why it's more important than you might think. I'm going to walk you through every step of the process, including how I focus stacked it, what my camera settings were, and all the software that I used to get to the final edit. So let's dive in. So there's one other step that I take before working on my images in Lightroom, and I process my images through a piece of software called DxO Raw, and that software does three things for me. Number one, it does noise reduction, and it uses AI to clean up noise while preserving or even enhancing detail, and I find it's especially useful for high ISO or low light situations. Number two, it provides lens corrections, and DxO has access to a database where it stores the optical characteristics of every imaginable camera and lens combination. So it then automatically corrects for optical flaws that exists in every lens, such as distortion, vignetting, and chromatic aberration. And then lastly, number three, it provides sharpening. And it focuses on giving you better edge clarity. And again, it's tailored to your camera and lens combination. So what it ultimately delivers back to me is a clean raw file in DNG format that I can now edit in Lightroom. In other words, it takes care of all the issues that might exist in any type of image, and it gives me a tremendous head start before I even think about editing in Lightroom. So let's talk about focus stacking. These are the three images here, and let's look at each of them. So for the first image, I focused right about here. And then for the second image, my focus was on this rock. And then the third focus, I went right at this plant right here. At 30 millimeters and f/16, the depth of field is already pretty good. And you can see that even in the out of focus areas, things aren't dramatically blurry like they would get if I was shooting at 85 millimeters in f4. But let's look at image one, and let's zoom in right here to this plant. And as you can see, it's a little soft. I mean, it's not horrible given the distance, and given that in that photo I was focusing really close to the camera. But now let's compare that with the third photo, which I focused deep into the woods, and we'll compare the two. And as you can see, if I flip back between them, this is the third image, and as you can see, it's considerably sharper, at least noticeably sharper than the first image, which is, relatively soft. So with wide-angle landscape photography, focus stacking, in the way that I do it, is really more about refinement and not eliminating the really, really blurry areas. Now, the tool that I have started to use recently for focus stacking resolution is Helicon Focus. So let's bring that into the picture, and I'm going to export out. Now, thinking back to my camera settings, you can reasonably ask yourself the following. At f/16, should we be worried about diffraction? And here's the thing, with my camera and lens combination, f/16 still delivers excellent sharpness. And at 30 millimeter wide angle, I already have significant depth of field naturally. Combine that with the work of DxO Raw, which already did some sharpening. I'm coming into this already in a pretty good position with respect to end-to-end sharpness. So a very reasonable question is, why focus stack at all? Now, I say that even though the difference is subtle, it's there, especially in the extreme foreground rocks, which are about 2 feet from the camera. And the background foliage is maybe, 60 to 80 feet away. The wider angle lens helps, but physics still applies. 3 images at f/16 give me that extra edge of front to back sharpness that a single frame can't quite achieve. Let me tell you a little bit about Helicon Focus. As you can see, these are the 3 images that have been brought in. And what I need to do to use the tool is to select all 3 images. And Helicon Focus has 3 methods of doing its focus stacking resolution. And because I'm just fairly new to the software, to be quite honest, what I do is I go through each of them and then I make a decision as to which one works better. And as I think I become more familiar with the tool, I'll probably have a better sense of which one gives me the better results given the situation. And it might perhaps be a subject for a video sometime in the future. What Helicon Focus brings to the table is really 3 methods, and in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through a detailed explanation of each of them. That's probably a video all by itself. But I can tell you from my personal experience that in this type of image, method B works the best. So we're going to select it and then we're going to render it. It's going to go through its mapping, and it's remarkable how fast this is. It'll just take a few seconds. As I said, it goes through its mapping, and there is the finished photo. And here's the best part. Let me go to retouching. What I can do is I can now look at this very closely from top to bottom and determine, has Helicon Focus done an acceptable job? And in this instance, as we're looking at the lower right hand corner, you can see it has. Now, if you look closer, and I've got this now at 100%, what you can see, here, let me do this a little bit differently. Let me focus on this. What you can see is that there is some ghosting that's occurred. However, you can see that the first image, which is to the left, is perfectly in focus. So now what I can do is using the brush, and you can see the brush information to the right. I can now, hit the left mouse button and then just brush out the ghosted portions. And all I'm doing is replacing this part of the finished image with the relevant parts of image 1. And that's pretty cool. We'll kind of jump out of here, go back to rendering. And what we're going to do now is we're going to save our work. Save it. We're going to give it a name. Smoky's Cascade Helicon. We're going to replace another file. And once we exit out of this, we're then going to go back to Lightroom. Now that was a lot of prep, but look at what we've accomplished. We've done some noise reduction, we've done some sharpening, and now we've got a clean, focused image from back to front. And those things are important. And it's great to begin your editing with a very, very clean document. Now, if you have found this helpful so far, and you're interested in seeing more videos like this, where we provide some tips and give you some insights into how we go about our business, hit the subscribe button. I appreciate it, and it really helps the channel. So here's the image that was returned from Helicon Focus. And if you kind of jump around and look at various parts of it, you'll see that we've got really good focus from back to front. I'm quite happy with it, and I think Helicon Focus did a pretty good job. So what I've also done is I've made all the changes to it, and this is what we started with, and this is what it looks like now. So let me take you through the changes that I made using Lightroom. First thing I tend to do is to play with the calibration slider. And what I'm able to do is to change all the primaries. So the blue, the green, and the red. And you can really go crazy with these things, moving them in extreme ways. But what I did was I bumped up the saturation of the blue primary. I brought down the hue, or at least I moved the hue to the left, and also brought up the saturation of the green primary, moved the hue a little bit to the left, which is something I like to do with fall colors. I saturated the reds just a little bit, and that I think really helped bring out the oranges in the leaves. So without the calibration, you can see it looks a little bit flat, and I think doing that helped this image along quite a bit. If you go to the basic tab, I didn't do a lot, but I did do a few things. I brought the highlights right down, and when they're up high, I don't like the way the water looks. So typically when I take any type of image, the first thing I will do is to bring down the highlights. And in this case, I think that brings out the texture in the water in a way that I find very appealing. Also brought up the shadows. Didn't do anything with the whites and blacks. The other thing I like to do is I like to bring up the texture, especially in woodland photos. Bring down the clarity just a bit. There wasn't anything that I needed to do with the dehaze, so I left that alone. And those are the only things I touched. The other thing I did was I created a mask, and let me show you what I did there. Essentially what I did was, using a radial gradient, I created a, let's show the overlay. What I did was I created a vignette, essentially. And I brought the exposure down just a little bit, and that gave me the vignette effect, which I pretty much do for all my landscape photos. So there it is. The next thing that I do from this step is I go into another tool provided by the Nik Collection. It's another DxO product, and it's called Color Effects. So let's pop into there. Now, if you're not familiar with the Nik Collection, it is a collection of programs for editing photos. I use a small piece of it, but what I do use, I use a lot. And if you look along the left-hand side, these are just a set of filters that come with the software. Most of them I don't use, but as I said, the ones that I do use quite a bit. So there's usually three that I use. One is called Clear View, and what that does is it adds a little bit of pop to the photograph. And what I like to do is I like to take the slider all the way to the right and just kind of see what the effect is. And you always have to be careful with this one when it comes to water, because it can really make things look kind of weird. But I think this is giving it a kind of a neat little effect. So I'm just going to take it to about here. Then the other one that I like to use is tonal contrast. And again, that just makes it a little bit more punchier. So let me get rid of it just to show you. See, I mean, this looks good, but when you bring in the tonal contrast, it really makes it jump out. And if you kind of go backwards and forwards, this is before, this is after. I really like the effect. Now I think the tonal contrast is a little too extreme, so I'm just going to back off on it. Oops, let me just back off on it just a bit. Yeah, I think I like that. We also can do a comparison this way. Yeah, I think that's good. And the last filter that I use is another one that I like quite a bit, which is called Darken, Lighten, Center. And really what it is, it's a vignetting tool. It's just let me just select it. And what you see is, let me turn it on and off. And again, I like the vignette effect that it provides. What you also can do is play around with, you know, where do you want the center of the vignette to reside. And I think I'm going to like it right about here, because I want, did that do anything? Oh, that did something, but I don't want it there. I want it down here. There we go. So it lightens up this part, or it lightens up the lower part of the image and just darkens it up in the center. Now I think it's a little too dark up there at the top of the image, so I'm going to just brighten up the border luminosity. You can really take it to the extreme, but I just am going to do that. All right, so this is what came in from Lightroom. This is what we're going to deliver back, and I'm liking this. So we'll jump back to Lightroom, and yep, there it is. So here's the image that's been returned from Nik Color Effects, and we're just about kind of in the final stretch. Earlier in the video, I did mention how much I hate it with a passion, sky showing through the woods. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this now into Photoshop and get rid of this. And what I'll do is I will speed it up. Okay, this is what we ended up doing in Photoshop. If I take off the mask and I put it back on, as you can see, it's not a bad job. I did it rather quickly, and if I was doing this and I had the time, I might take maybe 20 or 30 minutes to really get it right, but this is a pretty good representation of what I was trying to do. So we will save it and head back to Lightroom. And here it is. So we are really in the home stretch here, and there's three things that I want to do and that I usually do in most of my woodland, stream, and rocks kind of photos. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply a mask, and it's going to be a linear gradient, and I'm going to apply it down here. And what I want to do is what I really want to accomplish is I want to provide a little bit of depth in the photo. So what I'll do right at the bottom is I'm just going to bump up the texture a bit. Nothing crazy, but just enough to kind of suggest more detail. And then what I'm going to do is take another mask, and again, also a linear gradient. And what I'm going to do is take out a little bit of texture, make it a little softer, maybe a little less clarity. Again, nothing extreme, but just to kind of show a difference as we're moving from the foreground into the background. And then one last thing I'm going to do is make a bit of a glow back here. And the way I do that, there's a couple of ways to do it, but one of the ways I do it is I create a radial gradient, then I feather it, and then I go down to the dehaze, and I do kind of a reverse dehaze just to give it a bit of a glow. And in doing so, I'm losing a little bit of the color. So what I will do in this instance, just given the way the photo or the image looks, I'm going to warm it up a bit. So let's see, that's not bad. I like that. So okay, so we are done. So we covered a lot today. Just a few closing comments. A large part of our discussion was around focus stacking. Do we need to do it or don't we need to do it? And, because I was shooting at 30 millimeters and at f/16, one could make an argument that perhaps in that situation I just didn't need it. However, I believe that there's value in doing it, and even if there are just incremental improvements, in the long run, it's worth it. But I think there's a bigger takeaway at play here. I truly believe, and it's been my experience, that there is value in consistency of process. And if you can lock into a process and stick to it, my experience has been I'm going to make far fewer mistakes. And at the point that I start making my steps optional, that's when I've had my bigger problems. And the last thing I ever want is to go into my office, pull up the photos from a shoot, and agonize over the things that I missed or the things that I should have done that I decided on site were optional. Where I find that process consistency also helps. When you have those long days, it's late, you're tired, you're hungry, often your feet are wet, and you want to be anywhere else except shooting. It's always great to be able to lean into your process, knowing that you're going to get yourself the best possible results, and you're not going to have any regrets later. So with that, if you're still here, I thank you. If you've gotten some value out of this discussion, please leave a thumbs up. I'd be very interested in your comments regarding process consistency, and if any of that resonates with you, or what tips you might have. And also looking for any comments regarding the end-to-end editing process. If there's things that you differently, or there are things you have questions about, please let me know. And also consider subscribing to the channel. It'll really help, and I'll appreciate it. Until next time, take care.